because we're on these devices and we're not actually socializing, we're not actually spending time with people, we're not actually thinking for ourselves, we're just mindlessly scrolling, means that we aren't exercising our brain in positive ways, and that means that it is slowly atrophying. You actually have a significant decrease in your working memory capacity, which is your ability to think, basically, and your fluid intelligence is significantly affected.
Would it be a truthful statement for me to say that excessive use of a phone or a device is literally making you dumber?
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode.
Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Dr. Mark Williams. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Thomas.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
So I am a professor of cognitive neuroscience. I've studied human brain for about 25 years, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I started my own business. Trying to create brain healthy world is my big motto, one organization at a time. So trying to bring what we now know about the human brain into organizations so that everyone can be a little healthier and things can be more productive and things can run a little bit more smoothly. And then I have a book that's coming out next week called The Connected Species, How the Evolution of the Brain Can Change the World, which is all about our brains and how we're connected and how we need to get back to spending more time with each other and loving each other a bit more than we currently are.
Sounds like a very worthy topic. You said that you would like to create a brain healthy world. At an individual level, what are some of the ways that someone might do that?
So number one is spending more time with people face to face. We're more lonely today than we ever have been, and that's really sad. And it's really, really harmful for us. Just having people in our lives that we spend time with regularly that we trust can increase your life up to 10 to 15 years, and it decreases the likelihood that you'll have Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and neurodegenerative diseases later on, and also decreases the likelihood that you'll have mental health issues such as anxiety or depression. So, one of the easiest ways is just get off the devices, get out of your bedroom and actually spend time with friends. Is one of the easiest and most positive things you can do for your brain. And something that we're doing less and less these days because of, the way technology's currently been set up to trick us into thinking that we want to be on the screen rather than with each other.
This is more of a knowledge question on my part. Loneliness. How does a neuroscientist measure loneliness?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually quite difficult to measure because it's a state of mind rather than an actual situation. But what we normally do is we use the situation. So we look at people who are isolated for some reason. So we know that they're actually lonely and isolated rather than just being lonely by itself. But we do know these days that a lot of people, even though they've got people around them, are lonely, or at least state that they're lonely, but that's usually with subjective reports. So normally when we're looking at it from a scientific point of view, we'll look at people who are isolated, which is a very easy metric to use for loneliness. But we also know that people can be lonely even though they have people around them, just because they don't feel a connection to those people.
Thank you for that. You did mention the screens. I wasn't going to get into it straight away, but it's a good segue. So what are extensive or excessive uses of screens doing to our brain?
Yeah, great question. Sorry for jumping into that straight away.
No, it's topical. It's fine. Just fine.
Always comes up. A whole bunch of the negative effects that we're seeing because of the way we use the screens. And look, it's not, the technology is great. And if we were using it in a positive way, we could be very beneficial for us. But unfortunately, we're using it in a negative way, which isn't beneficial. And so we've seen an increase in mental health issues associated with longer times on screens. We know people who have more friends on social media have less friends in real life and less people that they feel like they can actually trust. Kids who are put on screens or are given screens earlier are more likely to have ADHD or be diagnosed with autism. We know that kids who spend a long time, or normal for these days, normal amount of time on screens, have abnormal or lower ability to recognize facial expressions and empathy, so they don't actually aren't unable to respond to other people and how they're actually feeling, and therefore respond positively to them. We know that our intelligence is actually going down for the first time in history. Our overall intelligence across Western countries is decreasing rather than increasing. So up until the 2010-ish, our IQ was going up every year. It's been going down ever since then, which is a little scary as well from an evolutionary point of view. So there's a whole gamut of issues associated with spending too much time on devices, because we're not using our brains, and our brains are just like any other muscle. You use it or you lose it. And because we're on these devices and we're not actually socializing, we're not actually spending time with people, we're not actually thinking for ourselves, we're just mindlessly scrolling, means that we aren't exercising our brain in positive ways, and that means that it is slowly atrophying. And that's detrimental. So we're playing a pretty nasty experiment on each other, and it's not good results so far.
Well, you mentioned in the opening of your answer that there is a positive way to go about using screens. What's an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so if you don't have the notifications on, for example, if you take all the notifications off all of your apps and everything else that you've got on your devices, including your phone, then you're not being triggered by those beeps and buzzes and little bouncing icons and so on constantly. And that actually, it will increase your mental health ability. So you actually, by just turning off all those notifications, both depressive symptoms and anxiety actually goes down very, very quickly over about 2 to 3 weeks. So that's a really easy way to use a device in a positive way, just to turn off all the notifications and then schedule into your day. You decide when you're actually going to check your email and when you're going to check your Facebook and when you're going to check these things. And just by doing something that simple, will actually improve your mental health, and is a much better way to actually use the devices.
And do you use your devices in this way?
I do. I have all my notifications turned off. All my loved ones know, and my close friends, that if they want to speak to me, they've got to call me. So I use my phone in the old-fashioned way. I actually answer the phone if it rings and someone wants to chat to me. And any other notifications, including texts, I have scheduled in 3 times a day that I'll actually check those. And that's when I check them and find out, if somebody needs me or whatever. But yeah, if somebody needs me urgently, then they'll just call me.
Thank you for that. In your previous answer as well, you mentioned about the question is around whether or not devices are causing the decrease in, the negative effects, or it is the lack of the positive uses of our brain. What's your opinion on that, or what does the data suggest?
Yeah, so it's a combination of the two. One is that we're not using our brains in the same way, and so therefore we're getting atrophy. But we also know, just by having your phone next to you, there's a beautiful study called brain drain, which has been replicated since then. But it just shows that if you have a smartphone next to you and it's turned down, so it can't buzz or ding or do anything like that, it's turned upside down, and it's on your desk, you actually have a significant decrease in your working memory capacity, which is your ability to think, basically, and your fluid intelligence is significantly affected. So just having a phone next to you compared to having it in another room affects both your intelligence and your working memory. So it seems as though there's a direct effect of having the phones or the devices close to you. And then there's a more long-term effect, which we're seeing things like ADHD and autism associated with using devices, and also an increase in early onset Alzheimer's disease associated with having the use of devices, and other neurodegenerative diseases are more prevalent, and that's again associated with the use of devices. So there's both the impact of us not using our brains, which is going to have a negative effect, but also just the fact of having a device close to you is also going to affect your brain itself.
Would it be a truthful statement for me to say that excessive use of a phone or a device is literally making you dumber?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Well, as someone who values intelligence, which I do, you're dropping truth bombs. So thank you for that. For those people, and I think there are a fair number of them who are, should we say, addicted to the phone, whether they consciously know it or not. What do you recommend to them in terms of what to do next?
Yeah, it's like any addiction. You've got to be honest about it. You've got to say, yes, I don't like actually being beholden to this device or beholden to these tech companies that are capturing my attention constantly. Education, I think, is really important as well, especially being an educator. I think once people have knowledge, that's power. And so understanding what's happening, the research that's coming out, and then how it's happening, how these manipulations are causing these effects, is also, it makes it a lot easier then to take the next step. But then the next step is the hard bit, which is actually just to decrease the amount of time you're using the device. So, and one easy way to do that, of course, addiction is due to a feedback loop where you have a cue which causes a behavior or a thought. And then there's a reinforcement for that, which then reinforces the cue. And then next time you get that cue. With the devices, one of the main cues is the notification. So if you turn all those off, then it's no longer going to cue you. So you won't have that behavior as bad. If you're really addicted, of course, you're still going to probably check it, randomly during the day as well. And so you need to have some control over that as well. And there's lots of different tools out there. I know there's somebody, I was doing a presentation at a school recently, and one of the parents came up to me and they had this crazy contraption which held their phone, and you could only open it and use the phone every 2 hours or something. He'd said 2 hours on it, and so he couldn't actually open the phone and use it. He could answer phone calls, but he couldn't do anything else every 2 hours, and that was his way of getting around this addiction. So there's some cool, technology out there now actually helping us with those addictions, but also turning on the health apps on the phone and then monitoring how much you're actually using the phone, because I think a lot of us don't realise how much time we're spending on these devices, and that can be quite a shock for a lot of people to actually just turn on a monitoring device and have a look, every week at how long you're actually spending on the phone and all those sorts of things. I have 2 teenage kids, so you can imagine it can be difficult here. But what we do is we all have those monitoring devices on all the devices that we use, and then once a week we all sit down and have a chat about what our results are like. And because of my business, I'm on the phone more than my daughter is, and so she has fun chastising me over what I'm using my phone for, and I can then talk to her about why I'm using it for that and justifications for that, and we go back and forth. But yeah, there's now it's a big competition as to who can have least amount of time on the phone, which is great, right? Because she's always trying to beat me, and my son, he's not quite as competitive as her. But they're both keen to beat me and to beat each other each week. So that's another thing you can do if you've got kids or family, to actually set up a bit of a competition there.
Yeah, a bit of a positive reinforcement and a good incentive there to do it better. I'm interested to know what you make of the because you study the brain, So what do you make of the human being based on what is essentially an experiment, introducing these devices and seeing what happens rather than knowing that in advance and making the decision? What conclusions do you make about the human brain?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because back when we first had TV, um, for those who can remember when we first had TV, um, and the advertisers realized that they could use subliminal advertising to manipulate behavior. And this was just flashing things up um, really briefly. So we weren't aware that they were being flashed up, but they were actually changing our behavior slightly. And governments realized that was happening very quickly and stopped it, and made it illegal in most countries very, very quickly, within a few months of that actually happening. Um, and I find it really interesting that back then, governments were willing to step in really quickly because they saw that this was a negative behavioural response, and this was that they were manipulating our behaviour without our awareness. Yet the techniques that the tech companies are using today are far worse, far, far, far worse, and far more manipulative than what that was. And yet governments are doing very little, if not anything at all, to actually stop that. And I find that really disturbing that our governments today aren't working for the betterment of us, all of us as their constituents, but rather are allowing these extremely wealthy multinational companies to continue with this manipulation because it is having significant health issues across society. And we've seen productivity going down and so on. So that concerns me a lot. I think that's something that we all need to think about. And I think governments really need to step up and explain why they were willing to do something back in the 60s and they're not willing to do something today. What's changed? I think a few things have changed, but that does concern me. But we need to realize that we've known that our brains are social and that we're easily manipulated by the perception that we're part of a group. And that's all these things are doing, right? These social media apps and all the rest of these apps are simply making us feel as though we're part of a group. And so therefore we need to respond to that group as quickly as we possibly can because we need to remain part of that group. And that's why we have this drive to answer these notifications and answer these texts and answer these, what are Facebook noted things and all the rest of it. It really is just playing off our drive to be part of a group. And so I think it tells us a lot about our evolution, and it tells us a lot about how easily we can be manipulated, which is a little sad.
Are you saying that the responding to notifications and things similar to that are because at some level we don't want to be kicked out of the tribe and die? Is that your position?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the only reason we feel as though we need to respond, right, is because we think that there's someone at the other end who is going to get annoyed by us if we don't respond quickly. And that's the drive to actually respond, to check these things. And, Facebook and everything works off the fact that we are part of groups, that they have groups in there that you're part of, and how many connections you have, how many friends you have, how many likes you have. That shows how much you're part of these groups and how important you are within those groups. And so, the fear of missing out on all these things, which we never had before, is all associated with that drive to actually connect and feel part of that tribe and not get kicked out of that tribe because we miss a text or we miss something in that. Yeah, which is crazy, right? It's because most of these people we don't know.
Yeah, I would certainly say it's irrational. I mean, I was going to ask you about you gave the old-fashioned example of subliminal messaging in old advertising, and said that the current way to do it is far more manipulative. And I was going to ask you what's an example of a current way which is manipulative, but is that one of them?
Yeah. So, well, one of them is the likes that we have on Facebook, for example. Facebook has admitted that when someone gets a like, they don't give that like to the person who received the like straight away. They actually hold off on that like and give it to them based on intermittent reinforcement schedules to increase the amount of dopamine they'll receive, which increases the likelihood of them getting addicted to looking for those likes. It's the intermittent reinforcement schedules have been something that's been studied for many years in psychology, and they're used by casinos and so on in their gambling machines and so on to make sure that people stay gambling and continue to gamble and get the biggest high when they actually get a win or any sort of reward from those things. They're also, of course, using gaming to get people to stay on the games when they're actually playing the games, and Facebook and social media platforms use the same algorithms to get people to become addicted to looking at their Facebook and wanting those likes and putting up more things so they'll get more likes and so on. So that's one of the ways that they're manipulating us. Just the likes themselves, of course, are very manipulative because, it's giving you this hit of dopamine, but then they add that extra component to it. And then, of course, they show us stuff that we know, that they know we're into. So with Facebook, many of the other social media platforms, they use our friends to decide what they'll actually feed us. And then they also use what we've been searching for. They have algorithms to work out what we've been searching for and everything else that we've been doing on the internet to work out what we're going to like the most. And then they'll feed us that information. And they have some very sophisticated algorithms in the background to work out what that'll be. TikTok do it slightly differently. TikTok actually don't do it based on our friends. TikTok does it purely based on our viewing time, so how much we view any particular video, and then they feed us more of those types of videos so that we'll actually stay on it. So they do it in slightly different ways, but both are very sophisticated algorithms that we have a lot of difficulty fighting against, and they really do make sure that what we're being fed keeps our attention and keeps us on the devices.
I wanted to ask you about the fact that the government stepped in the 60s and created a law against it, subliminal advertising. And I've heard some, I don't know what you would call it, perhaps murmurs around making smartphones illegal for younger people. Would you be in favor of that? And what age would you suggest someone is able to use a smartphone?
I'd prefer if they would actually make the algorithms illegal. I think that would be a much more effective treatment. I think there are possibly are times when a younger person needs a mobile phone. If they're going places at night or if they're doing things and so on, and it'd be safer for them to have a mobile phone. And I think we need more education around the fact that the mobile phones are harmful. But if we got rid of the algorithms that run in the background, if we got rid of the likes and got rid of the comments, then they wouldn't be anywhere near as addictive as they are now. And that would make it less harmful for everybody. And so therefore people would be less likely to become addicted to them. So I think the first step, would be to do that, and then perhaps have restrictions on using the phones. But so at what age? I mean, I don't see any reason why someone in primary school would need one unless they need it for safety reasons, unless, they have a single parent family, for example, and they have to get home from school on the bus and, they're living in a big city or whatever. Perhaps then they might need the phone. But otherwise, I think, I wouldn't give a child a mobile phone until at least in high school, if not later.
Okay. Well, someone with young kids, I'm going to follow your advice. So thank you for that.
That's all right. But if the government steps in, I would prefer they step in and get rid of all the algorithms and the likes. I think it'd be a much easier thing for them to do.
Well, I'm going to take a sidestep and talk to a highly educated person about my knowledge of the brain. So if this goes wrong, I apologize in advance. I have, for what little I know about the brain was to do with the fight or flight response, and how there's an area of your brain called the amygdala, and that kicks in when you feel fight or flight, and it sort of takes over. So what I wanted to ask you about is there Well, there probably are, but what are the other examples within the brain where that happens? And how would you know when that happens? Because I find it quite difficult to be able to establish which part of your brain is actually taking over at what time. So what do you think of that question? And how's my neuroscience knowledge?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. The amygdala, when the amygdala activates, part of the amygdala is actually made up of several nodes, and one of those nodes is associated with the fight or flight response. And when that node activates, it then activates your fight or flight response. And your fight or flight response is just that your heart rate speeds up, more blood is pumped to your muscles and away from your stomach, which is why you get that funny feeling in your stomach and feel a little bit sick when it happens. You start sweating because more blood's being pumped to your muscles, so they actually heat up a bit, but that's so that you can actually either run or fight. And then you get changes in your eyes and so on as well. So you can tell that it's happening because your heart starts racing, and that's how you feel it. And a lot of people anxiety is really due to overstimulation of the amygdala. So the amygdala keeps firing even though there's no reason for that fight or flight response. And therefore their heart starts racing a lot and they feel really anxious about it. So that's, associated with anxiety. But I think the thing that we get a bit wrong about the brain is this idea that, it's the amygdala that's taken over, or the orbitofrontal area, which is your emotions, taken over, or somewhere else is taken over, when we know that your whole brain is working all the time and it's always all working and no particular region ever takes over. There's just more of an emphasis on one region because it becomes hyperactive compared to other regions. So everything's always running at the same time and everything is always happening. It's just that we notice some things more than we notice other things. So there's lots of areas of your brain which are involved in storage of your long-term memory, but we don't have any access to our long-term memory, so we're not aware of that at all because it's parts of our brain that we're unaware of, and consciousness that we're aware of. So what you're aware of now when I'm talking, which is what you're actually listening to, is your working memory, but that's really limited. So most of what our brain's doing, we're not aware of. Most of it happens without our awareness, which is why about somewhere between 50 and 60% of what we do every day, we do automatically without any awareness at all. And they're all the habits that we do constantly. And so most of what we're doing and most of what our brains do, we don't know anything about. And then there's a few things that come to our consciousness or come to our working memory, such as when our fight or flight response goes off, because we get that anxious feeling, we get that heart rate going really quickly. And it's basically the amygdala is really just trying to capture your attention so that you'll notice what could be potentially a threatening situation or a fearful situation you've actually got to do something about. And that's why we notice it and we think that it's taking over, but it's not really taking over because there's all this other stuff already going on as well. So yeah, I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about the brain is that the whole brain is working all the time. It's just that we've only got this little tiny bit of it, our working memory, which is really, really capacity limited, which we're actually aware of, and everything else is going on without our awareness. But it's all doing stuff for us, which is why most of what we do without being aware of it.
So is one of those misconceptions we only use 10% of our brain or something along those lines? Is that one that you hear all the time and think that's just not true?
Yeah, that's absolute nonsense. And it's a silly one because where it came from is the idea that, we've had people in the past like Einstein or like Da Vinci who are extremely intelligent. And if you compare what they are able to do to the average person only did about 10% of what they did. And so therefore the average person only uses 10% of their brain compared to those people. But that's just absolute nonsense. We're using our whole brain all the time and we're using everything that we've got all the time. And the more you use it, the better it gets and the stronger it gets. So, those people really did a lot of them, in the case of Einstein, right? All he did was focus on physics and theoretical physics, and he had all his suits were exactly the same color and exactly the same style, and all his shirts were the same color and the same style, and he only had two pairs of shoes that were exactly the same, and all his socks were the same color. So he didn't have to make any decisions in the morning because all he wanted to do is think about physics, and all he did was think about physics. Now, if you or I spent all our time doing nothing but thinking about physics, then we would probably be just as amazing at physics as he was. But then a lot of other things we're not good at, and there was a lot of other things that he probably wasn't good at as well. So yeah, no, we use 100% of our brains all the time.
Thank you for that. You mentioned about the clarification on the amygdala and anxiety. Is there anything that you do differently from, let's say, what a therapist would encourage as a result of your knowledge about the brain if you were facing, for example, feelings of anxiety?
Yeah, anxiety is a tough one because, again, anxiety is a learned behavior. So it's come about either because of a severe thing that's happened, something really shocking's happened to you, and therefore you've all of a sudden got this anxiety towards it, or it's come about due to a slow process where you've actually done the same thing over and over again, and that's built it up. And I think COVID's a great example of how anxieties can come about due to a slower process, because during COVID, a lot of us, or most of us in most countries, were told we had to socially isolate and we were locked away. And so we spent time with less people. We spent time with very few people. And so over that period that we were by ourselves, our brains adapted to that new situation, which was being with one or two or three, four maybe people, very few people, all day, every day for long periods of time. So our brains adapted to that and got used to it. And then, of course, when all those lockdowns and everything stopped and we were told, oh, you can come out into the real world again, a lot of people realized that they then had social anxiety because then when they came out into the real world, their brain was used to being isolated, was used to being by itself. And that's what they'd adapted to. And so all of a sudden they had to come out and be with people, and they got, the fight or flight response in response to that because of the fact that their brains had readjusted and had now become this in this new state. And so they need to get over that. You need to challenge that. You need to then spend time with people, even though it is anxiety provoking, so that you get over it and your brain readjusts to this new situation. So, realizing why these things happen and then adjusting to them by actually treating it, by confronting it is the best way to do it. And it is the way most therapists would do it. I just think, I'll leave it there. I won't ever go to therapists, but I do find some therapists, these days especially, there's a lot of problems with triggering. And so therefore they're enabling people to continue with the same situation rather than actually getting them to challenge that situation or challenge that belief. And I think we need to get back to challenging those beliefs and actually working on improving rather than enabling us to stay in the same situation, because I don't think that's healthy.
So your position would be, in order to change the feelings, you should change your behaviors before you attempt to change the way you think.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Much, much more succinct than that.
Yeah, I'll take credit for your answer. Don't worry. This is completely non-related to what we've spoken about so far and is actually not on your list of things that you've covered. So feel free to decline if you don't have any strong position. But there's a topic in philosophy which is heavily talked about. But as you're a neuroscientist, I'd like to know what your opinion is or your thoughts. And it's free will. So to what degree does a human have free will? Or is there some, should we say, degrees of free will? Just what are your thoughts on that topic?
Oh, beautiful. I used to teach philosophy, actually, philosophy of science. So I'm a huge fan of philosophy, and all scientists should be, because philosophy is one major component of all sciences. But yeah, no, I don't think we have any free will at all. So everything's predetermined, and it's all predetermined because of the fact that we never make decisions in isolation. So every time we make a decision, it's based on our prior experiences. And so therefore it can't be based on free will. It has to be based on something that's already been predetermined by our own experience that we've had previously. So if I asked you if you want to have a Vegemite sandwich or a jam sandwich, let's go there, jam sandwich or a peanut sandwich, then your decision then will be determined by your previous experiences with Vegemite sandwiches and with jam sandwiches. It wouldn't be random. And notice we don't make any decisions randomly. We make them all based on our prior experiences and what we've done previously, which means that it's predetermined.
And have you got a working definition in relation to free will, or is there? I suppose
there is no free will.
the issue of this topic is I find the definition of terms, so what it is that people think of as free will versus, do you think we have any agency at all, or do you think that it's just significantly less than what people think that they do?
Yeah, no, I think that it's significantly less than what they think there is, because of the fact that we never actually make a decision completely randomly. And the only time you do, my father-in-law is actually a psychologist, has been for a long time now. And one of the things he says with his clients, he works with a lot of clients who have major issues with making decisions, and he always says to them, well, if you're having an issue making a decision, then just flip a coin and say, it's this, heads it's this, and tails it's that. And then when you do that, you'll come up with the answer. And if you feel sad or emotional about the answer, then take the other thing, because that's actually what you wanted. And again, it's not random, right? Because you still are doing it based on how you feel. And that's the way we make all decisions. It's based on the way we feel, on how, and our feelings, of course, are based on our experiences. And so therefore, we're never making a decision completely randomly. It's always based on our prior experiences, which means that it's got to be predetermined.
Well, thank you for the answer. I think probably we could spend the whole episode talking about it, so I don't want to go too far.
It's a big question, that one. Yeah. And philosophers have been talking about it for years.
Yeah, and maybe never come to a full conclusion on it. But yeah, I appreciate the answer anyway. You mentioned the misconceptions around the brain. What are the most interesting, would you say, discoveries that we've made around the brain in your view?
The neuroplasticity, I think, recently neuroplasticity. So the fact that our brains are constantly changing. So we used to 30 years ago, based on work at Piaget and people like that, we thought that the brain went through these stages during our early life, and they were critical. And if you didn't get through each of these stages, then you'd never be able to develop certain abilities. And then once we got to late teens, early 20s, and that was the brain that we had. And then after that, once we hit adulthood, it just slowly atrophied, and we didn't get any better. We couldn't get any better, and we basically got worse over time. In the early 2000s, we realized that that's actually not true, and our brains are plastic throughout our lives, and there aren't any critical periods. So the whole theory of Piaget of these critical periods in childhood actually isn't true. And you can change your brain at any stage. And the IQ idea actually is flawed, because when you test someone's IQ, all it gives you is a measure of their IQ on that day. But then their IQ is going to change the next day and the next day and the next day. And our IQ can actually increase or decrease quite dramatically, even during our teenage years, but also all through our adult life. So I think that's the coolest and the most recent study, especially as someone who's a little bit older, knowing that I can still get more intelligent and I can still learn and I can still get better, is really, really cool. And I think it's something that if everybody knew that, I think it would change a lot of people's outlooks on life and get us all, working harder to keep our brains healthy.
And is there any age at which that becomes not true anymore, or is it just you can continue to get more and more intelligent as you age?
No, there doesn't seem to be. There seems to be a limit based on the individual's overall health. So, if an individual doesn't keep their whole body healthy, then the cardiovascular and all the rest. But if you are healthy and you stay healthy, there's no reason why you can't. They've done a recent study where retirees learnt a completely new language to the level that a native speaker couldn't tell that they weren't a native speaker. So, which is something that we believe just wasn't possible 30 years ago. No, it doesn't seem to be any. There doesn't seem to be any limit to it, and they've now found people in their 80s and 90s who are just as sharp as they would have been in their 20s.
It's great. And what would you say the implications of that? If everyone knew, what are the implications of that piece of information?
Well, we know that things like Alzheimer's disease, these neurodegenerative diseases that we get later on in life, which seem to be on the increase, are all due to our capacity. So if your brain, same as your muscles, right? If your brain is really, really healthy, then you're far less likely to get those neurodegenerative diseases. And so if everybody kept their brains really healthy and kept exercising and kept using their brains throughout their lives and into their after retirement and so on, then they'd be far less likely to get any of those neurodegenerative diseases, which are really causing issues in nursing homes and in hospitals and your healthcare systems and all these things. Plus, your own quality of life, of course, decreases when you get those diseases as well. So everyone would live happier, longer lives, and we'd have less impact on healthcare systems as well if we all looked after our brains and actually kept them healthy. And I think it's really important for people to realise that we not only need to exercise our bodies, we need to exercise our brains and keep our brains healthy so that they will continue to work well, well into our 70s, 80s, 90s.
And have you got any thoughts on the examples of what that might be, like reading or chess or activities that people can do?
Yeah, so the one thing that actually activates more of your brain than anything else you can do, and that is socializing. So actually spending time with people face to face. It has to be face to face because there's a big difference in how our brain responds when we're on a device compared to face to face. But if you are meeting up with people regularly and having conversations with them and discussions, people you trust and people you're willing to have deep and meaningful conversations and talk about, things like whether or not we have free will and all those sorts of things, then that can increase your lifespan by up to 15 years just by doing that. Because our brains have actually evolved to be social, because we're a social animal, that's one of the most important things for us to do. And one of the things that, it is the thing that actually activates more of our brain and exercises more of our brain than anything else we can do. So I would say, do that as much as you can. Reading is also really, really good. Reading both fiction and non-fiction for different reasons. Non-fiction is really good because it gives you a lot of information and exercises areas of your brain associated with knowledge and thinking and those sorts of things. So because you're laying down new memories and you're understanding the world better. A fiction, on the other hand, it actually really exercises areas of your brain associated with imagination and also with empathy and emotional intelligence and these things. So it's really good for those. So having a mixture, when you're reading, having a mixture of non-fiction and fiction is actually really beneficial as well. So although I just wrote a non-fiction book, so I should be saying just read fictions, no non-fictions. But reading both is actually really good for your brain. And then anything that challenges you, so things like chess and so on, but you've got to be careful not to do the same thing. So it's a bit like, again, like exercise. If you sat there and did, 200 biceps curls every day, but didn't do anything else, then as soon as you went to pick up a box, you're going to hurt yourself because you'll have big biceps and everything else will have atrophy. And your brain's the same. If you're just playing chess every day, then that's not going to be beneficial for all the other areas of your brain. And so therefore it isn't good at extending that. So playing chess is good, but you don't want to just be playing chess every day. You want to play chess and you want to read and you want to go socialize. And so, yeah, a range of things is much more important than just doing one thing all the time.
Well, socializing and reading books is also a societal good as well as a self-interest. So I'd say those are pretty good to get started. So you mentioned the book. What's it called, and what was it like to write it rather?
Yeah, it's called The Connected Species: How the Evolution of the Human Brain Can Change the World. It's based on a lot of the research that I've done over the last 25 years. And then, of course, a lot of other even more brilliant people out there that have done amazing work in this area. I wrote it during COVID because I've been asked to write it actually a couple of times prior to that. But when I saw COVID and I saw the separation that was happening and a lot of the negative things that were happening to us, but also a lot of the positive things that were coming out of that as well, I realized that it was about time I actually sat down and wrote it. But it's on the fact that our brains have evolved and we've become the alpha species through connection, through actually being able to cooperate, being able to collaborate and to be able to empathize and all these things. And so that's what's really enabled us to become the alpha species in the world. But unfortunately, we're being torn apart at the moment and we're not using that in the same way as we used to. In the last 10, 15 years, it's been very detrimental to our species, and we need to make some really positive changes now to evolve, to continue to evolve in a positive direction. And then, each chapter has tips as to how we can do that in a more positive way so that we can all become more connected and more collaborative and more productive and more loving.
Sounds like a well worth where you would spend your time. Sounds like something that you should definitely do. So thank you for writing it, and I wish you all the best with the sale of it, and I hope you do well with it. Is there anything that I should have asked you about today?
You stumped me there. There you go. No, I think we covered a lot of ground. I think we did cover a lot of ground. I think we covered the big issues that are probably on my mind at the moment. Getting us all back to being connected and decreasing the reliance on multinational tech companies. I think are two of the big crux at the moment. I think we covered most of it. Thank you, Thomas.
Well, thank you for being a great guest. And if people want to connect with you or buy the book, where do they go?
If you go to drmarkwilliams.com, that's drmarkwilliams.com. That's my website. You can sign up to my newsletter, which is free. And on there's links to all the books, to where the books are on sale. I've been told by my publisher I'm not allowed to name a particular bookshop, but you can get it at any retailer. theconnectedspecies.com. The Connected Species. So if you go to drmarkwilliams.com, and it'll send you to whichever bookshop you like to get your books from.
Well, thank you for sharing your knowledge and being a great guest.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for having me on.